back for another episode. And to give everyone fair warning, if you are listening to this one, you might want to feel free to listen, and we'll try our best to describe things. But we are, for the first time, going to share our screen a little bit and kind of show some things as well. So it might be a good episode to pop over to our YouTube to watch so you can see what the heck we're talking about when we're pulling things up. But we'll also describe enough that you'll get the general idea, but maybe also go to YouTube and watch the video as well. So we are going to talk today about our assessment process. We have done an episode where we've talked about our assessment process just from a little more high level. And while we're not going to get into like the absolute nuts and bolts of the assessment and every detail of it, we did want to take the opportunity to get a little bit more into the weeds of the types of things that you would see from an assessment, what we collect, kind of the story we're going for, just to get a sense of how much we love the process and the type of information that it really gives to athletes, and kind of give an insight into that information. So again, if you're listening, feel free to sit and listen, but maybe also later go pop open YouTube and see the videos that we're sharing. So our assessment process, just to kind of overview, and obviously many of the people listening to this have probably heard us talk about this, but is really to put together the pieces of what is in this current moment, what does your performance look like, and the ways that at this point in time we know matter for the game. Obviously, we're always iterating on that and refining it and making it, better and more knowledgeable. But what is your performance in the snapshot? And then kind of backing that into, based on your patterns, how are your patterns influencing that performance? How might you sort of change your patterns to influence it different? Is there a way that you can do that? All the way into movement, sort of like strength and power. Is there something there that might also help you influence those patterns and ultimately the performance in a way that matters? And we've iterated on this a long time, of sort of like a couple of the things I've referenced of what matters. I think that always is going to keep changing as we get more and more information. So what is the stuff that matters for each athlete? Simplifying the information as much as possible, just down to what matters, so that it's something that coaches and athletes can digest and take action on. That part has been really important. And right now we're in a sort of like probably the biggest transformation we have been in a while for this process, because of our partnership with Driveline and taking their sort of markerless system and some of their back development type work that they're able to do in the systems they have, to really take in a higher level of information and put that into sort of normative ranges and things that are really exciting about sort of where our assessment's going. So that is what we do out of that. It is extremely powerful, we have found, for the athlete to really understand those things about themselves. It gets a starting point for the athlete and coaches for us to know what to go after in a way that is much more targeted, that isn't sort of random, that isn't chasing things that either don't matter, won't influence that thing, will actively harm their patterns, will actively harm their performance. And so, we can't speak enough good things about this process and what it has meant for our athletes and our coaches. And so we just want to take this opportunity to dive in a little deeper on the pitching and hitting side to the types of things that come out of it, the types of visuals that come out of it, the kind of story that we're telling from it, and really give you guys insight into that. So anything I missed from that intro first, and then maybe we can dive into a little bit more of the specifics. Actually, Laura, I nailed it.
You nailed it. I think the iteration concept is, I think, one of the most important things that we talk about it enough necessarily. Our assessment has gone through transition. It has gone through improvement. We've looked at it from an efficiency standpoint, from all the pieces of information that we gather. It continues to be iterated. So when we, go into the fall and we do our college assessments, we're using the same assessment in our facility. It's not separate, right? It's a single process that has a ton of continuity through it. And it's comprehensive. We cover a range of intensities to understand, hitting and pitching patterns in their context, a diversity of data sources. And I just always think it's really important that not all assessments are the same, and to be really, really thoughtful of, getting into a assessment information from an assessment that maybe is only from one lens. I think it's a really important part of our conversation, is that we have a diversity of data sources, And that's really important when we talk about looking at the entirety of these patterns and in their context of, training particularly.
Yeah, well, and I think the thing about how we have sort of built the assessment is not just let's gather a bunch of information and then just give you information that hasn't ciphered out what matters in that, and that is what we did at first. That's what everyone has to do at first, right? I mean, you're just gathering information, you don't know what matters. And so we have built these systems to really start to see, from our work and gathering so much data, to start to see what does matter for velocity in a pattern, what does matter for ball flight in patterns, what matters, what ball flight works, all the way down to what ball flight works and what are we going after, and that has taken us a long time to get to. And when we talk about iterating, that's not ever done, because that will continue to change and iterate as our game continues to grow. So, I think when we first started this assessment process, I remember this is now probably 5 years ago, ish, I don't know, maybe even a little less than that. There was this idea of like backspin is so unique and it's impossible to create. And it's just, go get all the kids that can throw backspin, because this is just like a fluke basically that they can do it. And in our process, we realized how backspin was created, that in many cases you can teach backspin. Sometimes that is hard backspin, but sometimes it's off speed or whatever. And so now you have a whole generation of pitchers who throw backspin. And so now what works at the next level might not be the same version of backspin that worked at that level 3-4 years ago. And we might have to iterate off of that. And because of the way we pull our data and it kind of speaks to each other and builds into the assessment, we're refining those things and what we're looking for and continuing to iterate on that. And that has to continue forever. That just has to keep going and continuing forever. And that's a really important piece of what we're doing. So I'm going to pop open. I'm going to share my screen here. The first thing I'm going to pop open is a pitching performance summary. And we'll also get into hitting as well. And this is something, and this is going to be small. The purpose of this is not really for you to see all the details of it again. What we're not doing, maybe we could do this at some point, but is like going through the way we would debrief or talk through an assessment is not really the purpose of today, but just to kind of walk through the types of things that we go through in it. And the reason I wanted to start with the performance summary, and then Ashley, I'll kind of kick it to you to talk through some of this, is that we always start with performance when we talk about assessments, because at the end of the day, what you're coming to get an assessment for is to know, can I, should I, in what ways should I influence my performance? I want to improve my performance. There are sure cases where people come to us and their number one primary goal is to get out of pain or to make sure that they don't re-injure themselves. But that time will pass and they will get back to performance, because at the end of the day, what we care about is performance. So we always lead with this because this is what matters. If we're gonna go start tinkering around with gaining strength, gaining power, changing patterns, we have to know and watch how that influences performance, because ultimately that's the purpose of training, is to get better. And so that's kind of what we lead with. So Ashley, if you just want to walk through maybe just some general concepts of on the pitching side, why we maybe look at it the way we do, or what you get out of an assessment and how we kind of got to these places, that'd be great.
Sure. I think the pitching performance summary, it's a little bit bare bones. And that's okay, because there's a lot of kind of like context that the athlete will provide when we're actually going through the debrief. But we provide a table of some raw data. That's what you're going to see in the top left. It's each pitch type that the pitcher threw during the assessment, which hopefully is every pitch type that she has. We show them their max velocity for that pitch, the median velocity for that pitch. We'll show them the median spin rates, spin efficiency, spin direction, and those are the variables that go into break. So that's important to note as well, because when we want to influence break, we want to create more, we want to create less, we want to change its direction, whatever that looks like. We want to know the variables that, I always say it's kind of like a simple math equation, what actually is going into creating that break. So all of that is, available to them in table form. Typically, when they see that table, it's sort of just like, that's not the way athletes are wired to look at just like a table of numbers like that, right? So, but it's available for them to see that. Then below that, there's a visual where we start to visualize their break. And I think this is a really powerful visualization for them. This is based off of the median break numbers for each of their pitch types. We label them however they label them. And this is not command or location based. We explain to them that there's an x-axis, there's a y-axis, however many units you are away from the x-axis. Down in the, below the x-axis would be topspin or a sync pitch. Anything above that would be backspin. Anything directly on has no vertical component would be more bullet. And the same for the y-axis is going to tell us about the horizontal break, whether it's arm side, glove side, etc. So the reason why I say this is really powerful is because you can show them that table up top where it's like -4, -5, and it's sort of like, okay. But all of a sudden now you visualize, and I think just generally, this is why data visualization is so important. It's like it speaks to us differently, and certainly speaks to, I think, our athletes, regardless of whether they're high school or college level. So they can see just like how much is that pitch breaking, not only just generally within a single pitch type, but I think another powerful piece of this visualization is you see what your pitches are doing in relation to one another. So for example, if a high school pitcher comes and throws 6 different pitch types, meaning has 6 different names for pitches, but they all show up like directly on top of each other, that's a very quick way for her to understand that you're throwing these 6 different pitches. It means you're locating them, angling them in different directions, and you're calling them different pitches because of where you're locating them up versus if it's up, it's a rise, if it's in, it's a screw, but they're actually spinning the exact same way, right? You're just angling them different directions. And that is a much different concept than when we talk about like what scales. We've said that in like, 75% of the podcast episodes we have. We talk about that concept. This is what we're talking about. This is why we will oftentimes we'll say like, you can't just be like, you didn't hit your spots. It's not just hit your spots, because if you don't have a great pitch and you don't have any variability off of it, you could hit your spots all day long, and that's not going to scale at the next level. So this is just a quick way for the athlete to really understand, what are my pitches doing? Just generally pitch by pitch, and then again in relation to one another. So that's what we have on the left side. And on the right side is a little bit more, it's categorical. We have your velocity. We eliminate the names of your pitches, and we just generally look at, are you spinning the ball up, more bullet, down? How much horizontal break are you getting? Typically, what are the thresholds for each of those that separate average, above average, and elite break? There's always asterisks to that, because obviously that also depends on some other variables as well, like the velocity of that pitch. There might be things like your arm angle, release height, etc. But for now, to give them sort of this like nuts and bolts of like, how good is that for it to break that much? And then on the side, we have how much vertical separation you get between your pitches. Basically, the most negative pitch in our little visualization there, and then your most positive pitch. What's the difference between those? This is how well do you tunnel pitches? How well can you throw 2 pitches through the same tunnel and the break pulls them off of that track, off of that trajectory? If it's the example of that athlete who has 4 pitch types and they all sit on top of each other in that visualization, you're not going to have any vertical separation. This is you're just angling pitches. This is very easy for a hitter to see that pitch up and that pitch down are not the same. They're going to break off of each other very early. This is like late break. Like I feel like when you watch college softball, it's like late sharp break,
Late sharp break.
That's a concept we always hear. And, I think the reality is is she throwing the same pitch and just using the upper arm to pull it in a different direction? Or is she tunneling these 2 pitches down the same ball path for a really long time, and then the break splits them off? That's important to distinguish. So that's really what that means. And then we have your off speed, like how good of a tool that is. Is it in the right velocity range based on what you're throwing? Is it tunneling well with your pitches? If so, what is it tunneling most with? If not, is that okay? Like sometimes it will come up as an X. But what we're learning more and more, for example, is pitchers who have a lot of backspin, and they have a big sinking changeup. We're seeing a ton of success in that, because basically it's not about, it doesn't look like your other pitches. That big sink changeup seems to just be successful regardless. So maybe it doesn't just mean like that's bad, but it is saying it doesn't look like the other pitches. You should know that. That would be an example. So the way I would kind of deliver this is in a very simple, let's understand who you are as a pitcher. Number one, what's your strength? What do you really lead with and attack hitters? And you can't say command, not to say that command is not like that important, but when we're talking about your velocity, your break, your variability, like what is your strength? Do you have anything here that is like, this is at the heart of what makes me good? That's first. If you don't have that, we have to start there, right? So it might be, I don't have a lot of break actually, but I throw really hard. That's at the heart of your strength, right? It might be, I have average velocity, but I throw a ton of sink on this pitch. I have a little bit of arm side run, which is a unique spin characteristic. So we're just trying to identify like what makes you you. And sometimes it's a combination of velocity and break, and sometimes it's one or the other. And then we ask ourselves, do you create any variability off of that? Meaning, okay, I only have a drop ball. It's really freaking good. And I throw it at 2 different speeds. So like, great. That literally might be enough for you because it's that good. Now, if it only sinks like an average amount and that's all you have, probably not enough unless the variability you have off of it is really a lot. So we kind of talk about this story with our athletes from a standpoint of, you don't have to have all the things. The stronger one of those categories is, the less you need of all the others. So it's not about making sure you have everything. It's just making sure we understand, like, let's identify the main strength. Like a lot of athletes are just like, I need to go up in velocity. And honestly, most pitchers do need to go up in velocity at the youth level because they're not strong enough. I mean, that's just the reality, or they just have really, really poor patterns. However, it's usually what I have to explain to pitchers all the time is like, okay, you throw 61. You think that just going up to 64, 65 is going to be the deal breaker for you, but it's not. Like once you get to the college level, at the youth level, if you throw 65 versus 61, it might be a big difference, but like you are carrying nothing else with you, right? And that would be an example of how our pitchers might not fully understand that it can't simply be about that. Like, what are we going for that's going to create something unique, and how you break the ball, how you change speeds, if you create different break profiles. You're able to, you don't have a big sink pitch or a big backspin pitch, but you do have a little bit of both, right? So your main strength is the fact that you tunnel pitches really well vertically. So it's really getting them to understand that and for it to be very specific. There are times where I reflect on the fact that I kind of forget. I almost sound like it's like privilege the way I'm explaining this right now, but we've earned the privilege because we've worked really hard to like build what we have. But I kind of forget how you like used to talk to pitchers. Like I'm trying to think back to when I was just like a pitching coach and saying God knows what in there, and it's like, now we learn this pitch, good drop ball because it went down. And so now you need to learn rise, and first you do this, and this is the order. And I don't mean to like say all those things in a condescending way, but the reality is there are a lot of pitchers out there still training like that, where they're just going to their instructor. Their instructor is telling them based on their eye if a pitch is good. First of all, what does that mean? Like 6 inches is different than 8, and your eye cannot tell the difference between those. It doesn't mean you might not be able to tell the difference between an above average and an average drop ball, for example, because of your eye, the experience you've had over the years and seeing, so many pitchers doing one versus the other. But you can't tell the difference between 6 and 8 inches. And it matters at the college game. And then you certainly can't guide them on what they should be doing next just based off of some like linear progression. So there are times where I reflect on that and like kind of like laugh to myself, like that's ridiculous to advise a pitcher like that. But I know that's still the way it happens a lot when it's not only when coaches don't have access to tech. This pitching performance summary is a wildly different look. We've built the structure of this. It's a wildly different look and wildly different insight into what makes you you and what's good and what you need to grow upon versus just throwing on a Rapsodo and like looking at the iPad screen, right? So I just want to make that clear. It's this like bird's eye view. Let's take a step back and really tell the full story and make sure you don't spend your whole off season chasing something that we're like, no, I say in every debrief, lean into who you are. Do not chase who you are not, because you won't get it. That's the thing pitchers don't. If I just work hard on a rise ball all summer, I'm going to get it. No, you won't. And this will show us basically what you're already tapping into and if it's feasible to even tap into something beyond that. So that's I guess, I say a summary. That's kind of a lot. But
yeah, I was like, this is going to be a
pictures-
long episode, everyone. Buckle up.
Oh, buckle up. Well, you invited me here. Jeez. And so the debrief, I always usually start with like, what are your goals? Give me an example of 3 schools you think you like reasonably want to get recruited at and would go to. And then there's layers of conversation of like, hey, I actually think these tools could go there now, but I would advise them to only use you once through the lineup. Are you good with that? If they're like, that'd be amazing. Like, you're in great shape. Let's keep doing that. They might say like, no, I want to like be, XYZ role there. I'm like, okay, here's the tool we should add. That makes sense to you based off of this versus like, I want to go play at the University of X. And I'm like, here are some ways you would have to get there, but that's 3 jumps in velo tier. That is X jump in break. And for them to start to see those things.
Yeah. I'm going to share the screen really quick again with the hitting report, and a lot of it is, there's a lot of carryover. So I don't think I need to go into like every single detail of this because a lot of the concepts are the same, but we really are looking at and hitting when we talk about performance of, do you hit the ball hard and how often do you do that? And basically this concept of hitting the ball hard and having adjustability and really where the breakdown is. So we're looking at exit velocity, yes, but we're also looking at that in terms of how it matches with launch angle because we have to hit it far. And then kind of in terms of where those 2 things, exit velocity and launch angle, break down. Because oftentimes for high school athletes, we see this concept of, for this athlete, her exit velocity is below average. That's going to be something we're going to want to tackle. As we'll get into further down, that could be a pattern thing. That could be a strength thing. It's probably strength for sure, and maybe both. Sometimes that's what the case at the high school level. And so that's going to be something we're going to want to tackle. If you're hitting the ball 65, that's your max. When you get the, kind of regardless really of the level you go to, if you hit a ball 65 in the air, it's probably caught at the collegiate level. And so that's just something that, and if it's on the ground, it's not going to get through the infield. So those are things that we want to go up. But in addition to that, we don't just chase exit velocity for the sake of exit velocity. So we want to get this picture of where are things breaking down for you? Are you hitting the ball only in the ground? Are you hitting the ball in the air? Are you hitting the ball? You're doing both, but inside you hit into the ground, outside you hit into the air. There's all kinds of different breakdowns. So just like, I'm not going to go through every bit of this, and it's not necessary for this, but just like a couple key things, like things that we see often. This athlete, for instance, her launch angle actually isn't crazy. Like her median was 15. That's kind of in a good range for a lot of high schoolers. Most of the time we see high schoolers that hit the ball in the ground. So their average launch angle is negative. That's pretty common. We do our assessment off of a machine. So a lot of times they'll be like, I don't hit the ball on the ground that much, but when it's more game-like, that happens just as a result of their patterns. So this is like a better, I guess, general launch angle coming in. But what you'll see, just as an example, is that when you look at her field spread, when she tries to pull the ball, she hits it into the ground. This is something very common we see with high school athletes where they're not able, it's just a signal that they don't really have clean rotation. We're going to see that breakdown as they get older. So all of this lets us tell the story of, do you even hit the ball hard enough right now for the level that you ultimately want to go to? You might be having success hitting the ball 65 right now at 14U, but if you keep this same power going up, again, those balls might drop now, but they won't drop eventually. So that's kind of the pure baseline. But then as we are chasing that, which we are for most high school athletes, so this is different than, but if we have a college athlete or we have an athlete that actually does have a high power, then what we're going after then is, where does your adjustability break down? Is there something showing us you can't ever get to an inside pitch? Like you only hit, like I said, you only hit inside on the ground. So there's something with that. You see here, this kid like up, she hits kind of straight up into the air. We start to see these little nuances, and that helps guide our program and kind of paint the story for this hitter of, maybe you do have high power, your exit velocity is high, but all over adjustability is flagging. And so your ability to face a pitcher that has the variability we're trying to give pitchers is going to be low. And so that's what we really have to go after. So this is kind of how we paint the hitting story. Again, it's based off that concept of hitting the ball hard and being adjustable at the same time, and really kind of getting a sense of where those break down. I will say that as an athlete is then training with us, these are like little snapshots. We often don't go back to these snapshots in this way, and we could dig in a little bit more based on what we're going after. So if a hitter, for instance, they have good exit velocity and they're really going after adjustability, then that's really what we're going to focus on in our sort of internal dashboards. We're not going to keep pulling up this snapshot, but this is kind of providing us a little glimpse in this window at this assessment of the types of things that are really going to guide us for success. So that's the hitting part. We go usually from this part in performance into patterns. We're just going to show pitching today. It's the same idea. And again, the purpose of today is not to say like, these are the things you'll see. So we're not going to give every detail of what the biomechanics piece shows. That's not the purpose of today. You can come get an assessment if you want that detail, but so it doesn't matter that we're not showing hitting. The concepts are the same. What we're going to show today for the visuals is what we are working on with the Launchpad visuals. So this is really coming out of our work. We've visualized things slightly differently leading up to the same things that we've pulled and same sort of like data points that we've used. But the benefit of what we're working on now is we're able to much more easily show normative ranges and kind of where you might pop out of that and start to get down to like, okay, does it even matter if you're out of the normative ranges? Because sometimes it doesn't. And we get a sense of that. So I'm going to share a pitching biomechanics. Give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. So I'll let Ashley kind of take it from here, but so if you can imagine in the story that we're telling the athlete, like, here's your performance. Here's what you excel at. You excel at velocity, but you're struggling with brake. You don't excel at velocity. You have this like weird brake profile. And so we get into patterns through the biomechanics report after that to show and tie, where in the patterns, some of that might be feeding some of the things. So that's kind of the next story here. So I'll let you take it, Ash, from here on this part.
Sure. One, I want to kind of like jump in and say a couple things. Number one is that I've always felt like our superpower is in storytelling, and storytelling meaning making sure that information we present to the athlete is clear and they can understand why it matters. Because the idea of getting a biomechanics assessment, I think most people would like cringe because it just sounds like a bunch of like nerds sitting at a desk handing you spreadsheets of shit you don't even know what they're talking about, and that you're like, you don't know me, you don't understand what. And so right. I think our overall superpower has been in storytelling. The real beauty of the relationship with Driveline and utilizing their Launchpad, which is the markerless biomechanics system, is that not only the data visualizations, the ease of collection, they just go through their normal training session. They're just literally pitching. There's nothing different. And the cameras are just collecting all that data. They don't have to wear anything. It's super easy and it's fast to collect. So there's that. And then the data visualization, which just makes it even easier for us to deliver that story. So I think the real superpower is like the ease of collection and visualization meets our, storytelling abilities, which is incredibly powerful. The other thing that I want to say is that context really matters. So let's say we come off of a story with an athlete where we're like, your ball flight is basically, it's reaching your goals. It's where we need to be. That's a different story when we're looking at patterns. We sure as hell would not be looking at patterns and being like, let's change it all, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. So I would tell that story in a way that I would want that pitcher to understand her patterns so that she understands at the end of the day, how your body's moving sets up the slot your arm gets in, which is going to set up how you achieve what you do on the ball. And so understanding the connectivity of what my body does, what my trunk does, leads to where my stretch is in my arm, the position of my arm, how I deliver. I have to know that because I have to be armed with that information. If I'm trying to preserve ball flight, I have to know how the things that I'm doing are helping me create that. Versus the majority of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, we are telling stories to athletes who want to grow their ball flight story, whether it's break, velo, combination, etc. And so then we will tell this story through a lens of same thing, understanding what your body's doing and why it's only giving you access to X right now. We always finish this story with showing ultimately what position that puts the arm in and how the arm is unraveling to put fingers on the ball here versus here. And so that they really can understand, okay, that's why. So when you understand that, we're like, if we want this to change in your ball flight story, we have to reverse engineer that pattern story in order to get there, right? If it's just velocity, could we just take the approach of like, let's go up in strength and power? Yes, but usually just because of the complexity of the underhand motion, athletes also need to gain a little bit more in brake, variability of brake, change of speed, etc. And we're typically going after some patterns here.
I think it's really important to think about this as, you see this graph that we have popped up, and you see points where this athlete is kind of out of the range, right? So the green being kind of the normative ranges, and her line pokes out of the normative ranges, right? So we see that, and it's important to know those things, and that is what we're going for. And as we really narrow this down to understand what you're trying to get to in a biomechanics report is, how much does it matter that I'm out of the normative range there? Because everyone is going to have, I mean, I don't know that we've ever seen this, like the likelihood that you're ever going to get, this is not like, if I pull up Carlin Pickens, like the best pitcher in the country, that she's just going to be living in these normative ranges. She's absolutely not. There are going to be places where she goes out. And what we are trying to understand in the biomechanics report is, how much does that matter? Are you able to, the reason that a Carlin Pickens is great is because she's able to recover from that in a way that allows her to do something great. And so in those cases, we're like, okay, you're an amazing compensator. Here's where you recover. Not in this graph that we're showing, but like your angular velocities they pop back up because you're able to somehow like fly with your chest in a way that catches you back up, or whatever it is. You're able to compensate in such an elite way. And then for those, pitchers, what we're trying to figure out is like, is that okay? Or are we going for efficiency because we're worried a little bit about,
you have arm pain,
arm pain or whatever, those types of things. And then there are athletes who are like, you are out of the normative range and you never recover. And that is literally holding you back from velocity, from break. Your body is not able to compensate in a way that allows you to sort of like make up for it. And in that case, we're like, okay, we got to get back into the normative ranges here so that you have a shot, and that's really what this story is about, is not, hey, Sally, every single place you see yourself out of the normative range, our whole goal in training is to get you back in, which is why the ball flight is really important. It's why the wellness questionnaire and understanding what they're bringing from a pain standpoint is really important, because we are trying to get a sense of that. Because most of the athletes that come to us, there are cases where we're like, this is unraveling at the beginning and you never recover from it and it's making you mediocre and we got to like really go for it. But I would say much more is like, you are recovering in some ways from this.
Sure, especially at the college level. They got there for a reason. They've got something.
And I remember when we were first doing our assessments before we had things like this, and I was talking to someone and we were talking about some high level athletes, and I was like, yeah, even she struggles with X, Y, Z. And they're like, well, then how can that be right? How can that be the right assessment if like, shouldn't those kids basically be good? And it's like, well, they are good. They make up for it in other ways later down the road. You don't have this idea of like perfect mechanics. And so I think that is why we don't look at this. Now we can do normative ranges. We can show what feeds eventually as we're building composite scores. We can show which of these tie most directly to velocity and what are we going after. We can keep painting that picture. But what we are very unlikely to do is say like, you get an A, B, C, D, E on biomechanics patterns, because that's just a very tricky, slippery slope, because most people have parts in their motion where they have
and that's
fallen up.
That's storytelling, right? And that's what we're trying to like, it's content. It's why when someone gets an assessment and it's only ball flight, I'm like, I just don't even get that. I mean, you could have a snapshot of what your ball flight's doing in that moment, but no one could advise you off of that because they don't know how you're achieving that. That doesn't make any sense. And then if you get a biomechanics assessment and you don't know your ball flight, that's very tricky, right? Because you don't ever want someone to advise you on your patterns if they don't know what you're creating. We've certainly had episodes where we talked about that. But what we're looking at here, let's get into a little bit of the like nuts and bolts here, is what we're looking at is just a single phase of the motion. This is the phase of the motion when the athlete is loading, meaning they have the weight shift, their center of mass goes to their back foot. I'm a right-handed pitcher. So let's say my weight goes to my left foot, then my center of mass comes back as I load into my dominant side, and then I like push into the ground and push off of the ground. This is just a one-page piece to show us in that phase what is going on in the middle of the body. When we talk about when you're connected to the ground, the first thing that we start with is the middle of the body, and then the levers will be influenced from there. The normative ranges are really important, and we'll show green because we are starting to explore pitchers who throw 65 plus what do their normative range look like versus athletes who throw below that. Or essentially what we're looking at in this one is like the range of velocity you are in, you'll see in like the orange or red or whatever. And then green would be the like higher velo tier. And I honestly, we're at the early stages. That might not matter, right? And I think what we are kind of continuing to look at, is it about patterns and being really clean with patterns? Probably not. It's usually like the speed of the patterns, the timing of the patterns, as we'll talk about in a second. But so right now we are looking at it as kind of split from velocity, and that's why you're going to see two different colors. But we're going to see when you're out of range in something. And it's just as you said, Krista, it doesn't mean so that's bad, but it does mean it's going to be a part of your story. Okay, your body went out of what's typical here. Let's see what that causes you to do next, essentially. Very important to kind of understand that it might then catch itself up and we might not matter to something like this. Specifically in this load to launch phase, this is very much about how well do you use ground through hips. It might be like not well at all. We are seeing you out of range in a lot of things, but as soon as we get into what we call the transition phase, when the arms get extended to the target at 90 degrees and go to top of arm circle, that's when the motion gets upper body dominant. It goes chest and arm dominant. And so if the upper body is able to take over at that point and get into good position and allow for good deceleration patterns, you're throwing hard enough, like we might not care about this phase, right? But if we might see in this phase of motion, we're really not very efficient in how we're getting ground through hips, how we're, transferring energy, or the positions we're getting in for energy to be able to transfer from ground through hips. And if that's the case, and we do know that you create a lot of power from ground up, and we're going for velocity, yeah, we probably want to clean that section up a little bit, right? So that would be an example. I think just to kind of reiterate also what you're saying, Krista, is like, we've made a mistake for a really long time of assuming that we have to like match patterns, and understand that like there is a range. It's not about like you have to get to 45 degrees. Like I think about pitching lessons when like I was taking pitching lessons 1,000 years ago, and it was like your foot has to land at 45, and we're all trying to like land with our foot at 45. Like how ridiculous, right? A single degree. This is all based on ranges, and as we collect more and more data, the ranges just keep pouring in to say like, we can see the pattern. You can see the shapes of the graphs are relatively similar, but the numbers are going to vary a little bit. So this is going to tell our coaches as we're prepping, is something worth paying attention to? Eventually, it may not matter if they have a compensation for it, but is it even worth paying attention to? It might look a little different than you're used to seeing, but if it's still in range, don't spend your time on it, right? It's a very quick way for us to see that. So this would just be one example. If you want to go to the next page, this is just an example. I think it's the same exact phase of
Which
the
one do you
motion.
want me to open?
Like the drive leg, just a lever page. It's the same phase of the motion. But now we want to see like what happens as a result of that to your levers. So we'll look at trunk data in a particular phase. Then we will say, how did that impact the glove arm, the throwing arm, the stride leg, the drive leg, and we'll do the same process, right? What we know is that we know it's the levers are at the mercy of what happened in the trunk, but we'll start to dissect, and this is just one little example. This is just an athlete's drive leg, where you can see, okay, we can see it's a little out of range when we get to knee flexion, or it's out of range because it's happening a little bit too late. This is now we're seeing this like drive hip flexion extension, meaning like this push off the ground. We can see that something here, she's doing that a little bit too soon, too late, etc. This is going to give us a little snapshot on what is, instead of it just being subjective, like, ooh, let's look at her video and just scroll it and see what we see. Now, we usually pair this with video, because in explaining this to athletes, oftentimes it's really helpful for them to be able to see that. But again, just a good way to see, okay, you had this breakdown in your trunk. What happened with your levers? This is just a drive leg page. We just pulled one random page from a report to show here, but usually a lever takes on the compensatory pattern, right? Like you try to get on track from a trunk breakdown from a lever. And so we kind of want to see like, which one is it, right? So that's where we would kind of take apart all the levers and be able to explain that. Usually when the levers start taking over early on in the pitching motion, just by the nature of it having one turn, two turns, that's tough to recover from. Usually athletes don't recover quite well from that. But the later the breakdowns happen, the more of an opportunity they have to get on track. So that is sort of like at the pattern piece and how we would use those visualizations and use that data. And of course, we'll see tables of numbers as well. But the visuals give us this great opportunity to just identify very quickly what we're starting to see as far as breakdowns are concerned.
Yeah. And I think like examples of this that I would give without showing visuals for hitting is, as I said, there's most hitters that will come to us, they will have some sort of compensation that does these things. So let's say I'm sort of, I don't have enough load. I come out of my posture early. I don't have enough stretch to start, whatever it is. You'll see this timing of their hands, like really all of a sudden their upper body starts flying because it's like, we got to go, like it's time to go. We didn't get enough from the lower half, so we got to go. And the types of things that we'll see as a result of that is that like, that's an amazing compensation. Sometimes for hitters, you'll see that fly and those numbers will almost get like in range of where we're trying to get to. But the timing of it starts to slow down then by the time they get to contact. So it's like, because they had to start early in compensation of their body, it's like, kudos, that was a really good body compensation. You even got a lot of power. And maybe if you're able to get the ball out front or something, you'll be fine. Like maybe if the timing of it, but likely because you're going to have to start putting on the brakes sooner, that you're not going to be able to get all the power out. That would be an example of what we would see. And so we want to then figure out sort of like, what are we tackling there? And so that you don't have to have that kind of compensation, so that you have more, for us, that example would give you more adjustability in your swing, more opportunity to get that full power out on the ball. So these are the types of things that we're looking at when we look at patterns. I'm going to move kind of quickly on these last things. This is a good topic.
Sure.
I hope people are watching and looking at
while you're doing that, Krista.
Yeah,
I want to just kind of like take a step back. I think like we've talked in such level of detail, which it's so obvious to me, and I'm so proud of it, of just the insights that we have gained from one, struggling and iterating and just, being not content with just telling an average story, right? You said it perfectly, Ashley. Like our superpower in this storytelling and really humanizing this story, coming from the opposite side of academia and not having a ton of like community contact in this way of communicating data like this is a limitation oftentimes of like a biomechanist, right? Someone who's in that academic world. And I think being now on this side of applying biomechanics in that way, the storytelling to me is the single most important thing and skill that I think we do a really good job of, one, developing in our coaches, that storytelling piece, but also not being content ourselves of not telling a good story. And so if you're a parent, coach listening to this level of detail and you're like, this is amazing, I want to learn more, what I really encourage you to think about when you are, whether it's not us, whether it's somebody else you decide to pursue a biomechanics assessment with or an assessment in some way, the biggest question you have to ask in terms of value and your return on investment of what you're spending is there something out of this assessment that I can use immediately? There's degrading value. You take an assessment, a biomechanics assessment once a year, there's degrading value immediately. It's like buying a car. It starts to depreciate the second it comes off the lot, right? Because fatigue, pain, gains, patterns change, probably on some level daily, but when we talk about snapshots in time, we repeat this biomechanics assessment at regular intervals because we know that in that 3-month span, things can change. So if I'm a parent, I'm a coach, and I have someone advertising to me, get a biomechanics assessment, hitting or pitching, I don't really care what sport it is. Your number one question is, how can I use this immediately? What does this tell me about my child, my athlete, that I can use immediately? Because that information is going to start to be less and less valuable the further away you get from it. And so that to me is just like a cautionary tale of like, not all assessments are created equal. The storytelling is not created equal. And I think that's a very, very important question to ask of any business company, whoever is trying to teach you a system like that.
Yeah. Well, and I think as we said,
process like that.
And I think as we said, a biomechanics assessment, the biomechanics piece alone, if someone, the whole purpose of that is for them to tell you to get into like normative ranges, if they have normative ranges, or to tell you something looks different. It's just like big asterisk with that, because that's just, you have to be, if you don't know if you can't tie together what it means to be outside of that normative range and how it is playing into, yes, maybe something about your patterns further down, or how it is playing into ball flight and performance, then tinkering around with just trying to be normal is dangerous. You know, I don't mean dangerous like you're going to get hurt necessarily, but like, it's just not, it's no different than just kind of like guessing at that point. And so that can be, that can be things. So I'm going to pull up in the last piece really quick, which is our movement assessment.
Chris, I'm going to chime in for a second here, because as you go into movement assessment, at the end of the day, here is how this story goes. And I think like we just showed a tiny snapshot of like what patterns, like position. At the end of the day, we showed ball flight. Where are you? Who are you? And where does that put you regarding like what's good, what's above average? Let's understand that piece. Then we look at the strength, your movement quality, which is really stability, strength, power, and where are you? Average, below average, average, above average in these ranges, right? So what does that piece look like? And then there's patterns. And then within patterns, there are these spin-offs. There's these little bullets underneath, which is positionally, are you in decent position? It's like, yeah, actually you're in decent position. We could drive a little more rotation out of the motion potentially, but like positioning looks fine. But trunk arm timing is off. So we're looking at timing. Is it your arm and your trunk that are not on time with each other? So there's a timing issue between arm and body. Is it an overall timing issue, meaning your motion is just moving too slow? Is it that your patterns aren't great? You just move fast as hell, so you throw hard. You have a ton of power. You move fast as hell, but your patterns aren't great. And that is really why we're looking at some like pain issues. So this is the like tiering. We can just be so targeted at understanding like, what the hell should you be training, right? And so as you're going to go into this, like, here's what it would look like to show someone this like stability, strength, power piece. All of this is making it, when I say pick up one dart, throw a single dart and hit the freaking bullseye. Stop grabbing all the darts, just throwing them and hoping something sticks. This report is about being so granular in the types of things. It's ball flight, patterns, the timing of patterns, the positions of your patterns, what you're bringing to the table strength and power wise. Maybe it's not your mechanics at all. Maybe the biggest bang for your buck is just to put on 15 freaking pounds, lift some weight and move faster. And your patterns are actually fine where they are. And the only way to know that is to really get this comprehensive story. And for this report, it not to be my opinion, not to be your opinion, but the report to make that really clear.
Yeah. So I'm just going to touch on this very quickly. This is actually the same hitter I showed their performance. So this is a great example of, we saw that the exit velocity was low. So forget what we saw in patterns. I'm sure there is something in patterns because we also saw some adjustability things in there. So again, it's usually both. It's not just like your patterns are totally clean, but the bigger bang might be coming at it. And this athlete struggled with most of our movement assessment, and their power is low. And so this is a huge part of the story, which is, even if we cleaned up the things that we might have seen in the patterns, it is unlikely that we're just going to magically unlock some elite power, elite exit velocity if these things don't change. Also, the movement quality part of this might make it even hard to go, likely will make it hard to go after some of the pattern changes that we're going for, because your body might not be able to do what we need it to do. That might be why it's happening in there. So, let's just even forget what we might have seen because we didn't go through this hitter's biomechanics. It is likely that this hitter's story is going to be largely centered on, you need to get a better strength and conditioning program, or get into a strength and conditioning program, or put some energy around that if we're going to have the goals that you're trying to go after. And that is sort of the final piece, because oftentimes we're in high school and we're trying to chase all these little nuances and patterns, and then there's this glaring part of the story.
You have 88 hitting coaches and pitching coaches, and meanwhile you can't
all their opinions
stabilize on a single leg, and you're having trouble plane control. It's like, what are we talking about?
And so that's kind of the last piece. And it's not, I think we have had time periods where we've been like, just go do that, and like, we'll see you in the cage at some point. And we don't take it like that anymore, because there are pattern changes that we can be making, and certainly promoting in the meantime, and making sure we're designing an environment that is accepting the changes that are coming as you are making changes on the strength floor. And that's why we do everything together. But it is I would say probably the one I just showed is the most extreme example of like, that is the story, you know, and so we can't ignore that part of the story and just think somehow magically, if I make your swing cleaner, you're going to hit the ball 80 miles per hour. Like, it's just not going to happen if your power is low. And so that's such an important thing for us to navigate. So that's kind of the whole story. I think we laid it out well.
Is it? It's like a 10% of the story, but it's a snapshot of the story.
Clearly something we can talk about a lot.
Yes. And I think it's just like, we love this process so much. I love being able to give athletes this knowledge. Obviously, it's just the beginning of the journey. So as we've kind of said to everyone, certainly this is something you can come get from us and like go take it back. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to train with us out of it. But the sort of next question to be asking is, what am I doing with this information? And we really work hard to kind of deliver it in that. And then how am I on an ongoing basis tracking to make sure that these changes I'm going after and what you said matters are happening? And that's why training with data, having some level of reassessments, really knowing what these things mean is such an important loop to this story, because it's great to know this information. It's such a powerful beginning to training. It is so important. And also, it doesn't mean a lot if you're not tracking things on an ongoing basis and making sure that those are working.
Well, even Krista, the last debrief that I gave, it was like, actually, your patterns are pretty good. You're just under rotating, but not by a ton. Here's how, you know, like, this is something simple. I know it's something simple that can be attacked. And I feel very confident, even in like, okay, if you showed up to training this many days, you're at OGX, this time frame, we should start to see X. That's what we would expect. Obviously, there's always individual, you know, variability, but that athlete was not planning at the time to be like training with OGX. And so it's also this just like, are you going to, you know, will the coaches you're working with know how to drive more rotation out of your body? You know, it's such a simple concept for us because we spend so much time on the like, okay, now what are the training protocols to then go after or to implement based on this data? And then is that working? The reason why we have created protocols is because we now have the feedback loop of the data to be like, yep, she's got more rotation now. So I left there thinking like, great information we just gave her, but also, are they going to be able to drive that change? And to me, it's so small. And then also, will they even know if they're making that change? So I did want to leave them with like, you're not going to have access to another biomechanics assessment, but if you are driving more rotation out of the motion, here is what you'll see on the ball, so that they at least can have that level of feedback, because there has to be that. You have to link it back, whether it's velocity, whether it's brake, whether it's just commit something with command. So I tried to leave them with that because I did have that thought, like, God, it's just so much smoother if it's like, great, and now we have the protocol to attack that, and we'll measure whether or not we're on the right track, right? So I think like when you don't have that, it is a little bit trickier. Not to say we're the only people in the world who know how to coach, but you know, this idea of the data constantly feeding what you're doing in training, that in itself is incredibly powerful.
Yeah. All right. Well, go to YouTube if you're on YouTube right now, because we didn't get that into the details, so you probably won't understand what we were talking about, but you missed the visuals, which we don't normally do. And I'm sure we'll come back to these topics, and I'm excited to see where we continue to iterate it, because our assessment, if I pulled up one time, I tried to pull up someone's assessment that's trained with us for a long time, and I pulled up one from like 5 years ago, and I was like, wow, this has...
You're like, that looks really bad. Good thing. That's why we became really great storytellers, because the visuals were so freaking bad.
Yeah, or it's like so bare bones, or it was like, we used to write novels, like literally we delivered like a 9-page hand-typed paragraph PDF.
Yeah, but now we're great storytellers because of it. So there you go.
Yeah, right. And so, and we continue to, and we're going to continue to get more information, and you know, we'll learn more, and it might change what we learn, and that's the whole point of all of it. So that's the exciting part of all of it. So I will kind of sum it there, and I'm excited about our assessments now opening up at driveline locations with them. So there's more places that you can go to do it. You can do it at UNO always, University of Nebraska Omaha. You can do it at our facility. So there's just more places and opportunities for people to get this information, which is so powerful, which is really exciting to us. So if you are listening and do an assessment, feel free to contact us. But otherwise, until next week.